As an adult, I spent a decade living in St. Louis and learned what an absolute gem of Missouri history the River City is. And today I want to tell you about one of St. Louis's amazing Civil War era citizens, Priscilla Henry. I began my painting of Priscilla Henry before I decided to start recording for my YouTube channel, so I don't have video of the first half of the painting process. I first learned about Priscilla Henry in 2022 from a friend who gives St. Louis cemetery and history tours. I was fascinated by Priscilla's story and decided to paint her. There are no known portraits or photographs of Priscilla from her time, so all images of her, including mine, are artist imagination. Priscilla's story is extremely unique in not just St. Louis history, but in American history. She is a true rags to riches story, and her ending is disappointing and not what she deserved. She was born on a plantation in Florence, Alabama, during the time of enslavement in 1829. When the Emancipation Proclamation went out, the plantation owner where Priscilla and her family lived chose not to tell the enslaved population living on his plantation. Priscilla and her family ended up working for 2 more years after freedom. Government scouts who went out to rural plantations to interview the black population to make sure that they were aware of freedom and that if they were working that it was by choice and that they were being paid, went to the plantation, and that's how Priscilla learned of her emancipation. She made the decision then to go up north to St. Louis, where she'd heard that you could make a good living as a washerwoman. So she set off up the Mississippi River. Sadly, Priscilla would soon learn that the reports had been exaggerated, and making a living as a newly freed person of color was almost impossible. She managed to land a job at the Lindell Hotel, which at 530 rooms was the biggest in North America at that time. She cleaned toilets and emptied spittoons in exchange for her room and board, and long hours of heavy labor were required. With the payment being room and board only, there was no chance of saving for anything better. On March 30th, 1867, the Lindell Hotel caught fire and burned to the ground. With no funds, her prospects were grim. Reporting at the time said that there were no injuries in the fire, but rumors abound to this day that part of the staff was trapped and had to make their own way out and were injured and burned in the fire, but as newly freed people of color, it was suppressed from the news. Even though the only compensation at the Lindell had been room and board, finding another such position was suddenly impossible because the entire Lindell Hotel staff was also scrambling about trying to find new jobs. Priscilla then moved into what was known as a boarding house, which was often a euphemism for a house of prostitution. Priscilla continued doing washerwoman laundry work whenever she could get it, along with her night work at the boarding house. It was during this work that she met Tom Howard, an ex-Confederate soldier with a brain injury from surviving a shot to the head during the war. Tom saw potential in Priscilla and became her lover and her financial backer, in opening her own brothel Bordello. Tom was a known swindler and gambler who often flashed cash around St. Louis with little to no evidence of how he got it. St. Louis was going through a social experiment at the time. The city decided to legalize and regulate prostitution. The requirements to be in compliance with the law were that the business was conducted indoors at a brothel and not on the streets, and also that the ladies working in the industry must be examined at the Social Evil Hospital and have a certification to work. Although this sounds quite progressive, attitudes at the Social Evil Hospital actually continued to be consistent with the time, and due to the high fines and the rough treatment, most of them eventually, after a year or two, simply quit registering and complying with the law. In 1880, through investors, Tom was able to secure a grand home on 206 South 6th Avenue for Priscilla from a family that was leaving the inner city. Priscilla's decorating bill from P. Loire Interior Decorators in St. Louis was $437,000, which she paid off in $500 installments. Most of the madams of this time got around the segregation laws by hiring mixed-race girls who could legally, in accordance with the segregation laws, be seen by men of any color. However, Priscilla did something a little different. She actually set up 2 houses of working girls, and one was of black ladies and one of white ladies. White men had the privilege of choosing either, but the black men could only visit the black girls due to the current laws. A man much younger than Priscilla, but born near that same Alabama plantation location that she was, named William Charles Handy, came through St. Louis and got an extended playing gig at Priscilla's establishment. He actually got the inspiration for St. Louis blues while working at Priscilla's place.
How young are you now, sir? 75 years old. I guarantee you when you hear him play his St. Louis blues, would you play St. Louis blues for us, Mr.
I'll be glad to do it.
Thank you very much, sir.
There's a very common assumption today that a madam or working lady in the prostitution industry wouldn't be religious or charitable, but Priscilla was very, very well known to be a member of the St. PaulAME Church, which she attended with Sarah Breedlove. Sarah is better known as Madam C.J. Walker from the Netflix show Self-Made. The St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church that she attended in St. Louis is a beautiful historic building that's still in operation as a current church today. One of the most amazing and unheard of things in Priscilla's story is that after she became a rich woman in St. Louis, she bought back the plantation that she'd been born on and gave it to her family. Her father lived out the rest of his days there. Priscilla eventually moved her niece and her niece's 5 daughters up from Alabama as well and set them up with a nice house and a pension of their own from her money. One of the saddest things in Priscilla's story is that Tom, her benefactor who set her up, turned against her eventually. He began cheating on her with one of Priscilla's employees, a cook, and they conspired to begin poisoning Priscilla and her nieces in order to take all of her money, her accomplishments. There were a few people who occasionally stepped in to try and protect Priscilla and get Tom out of her life, but he would usually weasel his way back in, and Priscilla would, for some reason, end up trusting him again. Towards the end of her life, whenever her misery from all the poisons that Tom and his paramour were putting in her system, she was so miserable and her religious convictions began to really hit her, and she believed that the misery that she was enduring was due to her lifestyle. Once Priscilla finally hit a point where she put her foot down, completely wrote Tom out of her will, kicked him out of her life completely along with his paramour, her employee Nancy. 2 weeks later, Priscilla was suddenly dead. The suspicion is arsenic poisoning. Not long after Priscilla's death, Tom was found floating in the Mississippi River. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch published a really scathing article and obituary, if you can call it that, after Priscilla Henry's death, and considering their quite different treatment of Madam Eliza Haycraft's death earlier, it seems very obvious that some of the vitriol was motivated by race as opposed to her profession. St. Peter's Cemetery agreed to accept Priscilla's body, but much like when Bellefontaine accepted Eliza Haycraft, there was a stipulation that they can never have a monument and that 20 plots around them must also be purchased so that no one will ever rest close to them. In March, I was contacted by one Francisco Alonso from BBC News Mundo, the Spanish edition of the BBC, requesting permission to use my portrait of Priscilla with an article. I was happy to give it as I love seeing her story get more attention. Hopefully maybe one day she'll get the Netflix treatment that Sarah Breedlove did. I believe she deserves it. If you've watched to the end, I appreciate you watching. I hope you like and subscribe. Thank you.